part of the book is about poker itself, so sort of explore sort of philosophical and psychological components of poker. And part of the book is also, that's why I call it a parody of capitalism, because I want to sort of explore, so what can poker tell us about life as such, or capitalism, or whatever you like to call it. So in a way you can say I try to read poker kind of in the same way that we would read a great piece of art or a great novel or something, where we would say, okay, what can this teach us about life and society and the times we live in? So, as you said, part of the book is, it sort of writes the history of capitalism, or the history of poker, but makes it sort of parallel to the history of capitalism. So I sort of compare different forms of poker with different stages of capitalism. And of course we know that poker is, or at least it used to be, maybe it still is, but it's very connected to American history and American society and also American capitalism. So, and it emerged in, or started to develop in the 19th century. And at the time, it was very, the kind of poker that was played at the time was a very simple form of poker. It was called flat poker, and it then later evolved into what we know today as draw poker. And it was basically a game, more or less a game of chance, but also a game of being able to hold your own when you take big risks and being courageous and stuff like that. And that sort of corresponds very nice to the way that capitalism at the time was you could call like a frontier capitalism. It was like exploring or expanding capitalism into the West. And poker was a game that was sort of played on the frontier between what was already capitalism and what was not yet capitalism. So it was about being able to face these unknown risks. And what we then see in the 20th century is that poker evolves into something that's much more mathematical, much more rational, if you like, much more logical. And it was the most popular form of poker in the beginning of the 20th century. What we know as 7-card stud, where you can see a lot of cards. There's a lot of open cards, which means that it's a game that lends itself very much to probability theory and logical thinking, and that corresponds to the kind of capitalism we would call Fordist capitalism, which is about optimization, management, efficiency, calculation, all these kinds of things.
Right.
And then sort of the final stage is what we have today is perhaps what we could call financial capitalism. And that corresponds to the most popular game today, which is Texas Hold'em, which is kind of a hybrid of the two. So on the one hand, we have this, you have to read your opponent, you have to face up to risk and all this, but at the same time, you also have to be good at rational thinking and calculation and stuff like that. So in a sense, you could say the kind of capitalism we have today is kind of a hybrid of the two forms. There's a lot of calculation, but there's also a lot of this sort of risk-taking. A philosopher called Slavoj Žižek.
Yes.
And what he does is that, so he has this, I wouldn't call it a model, but he has this threefold distinction between the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary.
Okay.
So the real is kind of, in a way, you could kind of say it's sort of the material component of the world, but it's also something that's beyond what we can control and beyond what we can perhaps understand. And that's, for me, sort of corresponds to the element of chance. That's kind of what gives the dynamics to poker, is that there is this element of chance that we cannot control. But then, of course, in a way, we try and control it by using probability theory. And that corresponds to the domain of what he refers to as the symbolic. So we can kind of calculate, in a way, what the probability. Of course, we can't predict how the cards are going to come, but we can sort of calculate probabilities. And then finally, there's what he calls the imaginary, and that refers to that whatever we do as humans, we always sort of think, how does the other look at me? We know this from religion. There's this idea that God is looking at us all the time, so we kind of structure our actions in terms of what would he think about what I do now, if you believe in God. But if you don't believe in God, you believe in other things. Maybe you believe in the market, or you believe in other entities. And that's also what poker is that's another very important component of poker, is always imagining how the others look at me when I do something. So of course that's the element of bluffing, but also just structuring your game in a way to put on a certain appearance so that the other players think that you have a certain hand, and so forth. And then all these three elements then combine into the calculation of, what's my position now in the game. No, I think you're right. I think a lot of a wide range of phenomena fit under what you're talking about. This idea of hedging, maybe you could distinguish. So some people, like the examples you give, will probably try and hedge themselves within the market.
Right.
So to say, take certain positions so that if this happens, then at least I'll be fine. But I think there's also a lot of people who hedge themselves outside of the market, which could be, so I need to build some personal relationships, so if there's a huge crisis, I have a lot of friends, or I have a strong community, or I have people I can rely on. So that's another form of hedging. And then of course you have the sort of prepper hedging. I think that's an interesting phenomena. It's like a radical form of hedging, to say, well, I believe the whole thing is going to collapse. I think I will hedge against that. I will buy gold. I will buy weapons. I will buy canned beans. I will buy, all these kinds of things. So I think this idea of hedging, I think is a very fundamental thing, or fundamental strategy for many human beings. But I think we should also be open to, and maybe you could also say, well, maybe the good society is the society that provides many people the opportunity to hedge against risk.
Exactly.
I think I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm kind of thinking it would be interesting. So today we map different political orientations or parties or ideologies, if you like, on the basis of their sort of, what is their vision of the good life or the good society. But it would be interesting to do the reverse, to say, let's try and map different political groupings or political orientation in terms of their ideas of the impending catastrophe or the impending or whatever risks. So kind of saying what would be, if we look at different political orientations as hedging strategies, you could then ask, what are they hedging against? I think it could be, one could, now that we have you have the election coming out in the U.S., one could ask oneself, so if you vote for Trump, if you like him, maybe it's because you share his vision of catastrophe, and if you vote for Hillary, it's because you share her vision of catastrophe, and you think that by voting for each or either one of them, you kind of think you're hedging yourself against that scenario. Today we're sort of at a moment in history where the 20th century, and perhaps even also before, has been marked by the build-up of these huge systems. So kind of, in order to succeed, you have to be able to or at least that used to be the case, you had to learn how to operate within big systems. I know, so I teach at the Copenhagen Business School, and part of what we teach our students is to be able to interact with large systems. But at the same time, I think we're also at a point of in history where it's not really clear if the future is going to be the continuation of this, like, okay, so even bigger systems, even bigger corporations, even bigger, perhaps even monopolies, if you like, or whether we're going to see a shift towards smaller systems or other kinds of systems, say Bitcoin and other similar things. And I'm not quite, I'm not sure how this is going to play out. I think I see trends going in both directions. I see smaller systems or smaller things sort of being developed and being successful, but I also see some of the big systems becoming even bigger, and even more sort of pervasive and inevitable and whatever you like. So I think, in a way, one could say that, so the historical question today, and perhaps also the political question is, are we going to have a world with few large systems, or are we going to have a world with many small systems?